Min, good morning.
Good morning. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I think it took a minute. There we go.
Min, welcome to TravelZoom. I'm very excited to talk to you. So let's start with Phenakite and your most recent restaurant. It is LA Times Restaurant of the Year. Huge congratulations. So, to put it in context, there are 30,000 of restaurants in LA. So to come on top, it's a huge achievement. And I was wondering if you could, when people ask you to describe food you serve in Phenakite, you tend to say it's Californian, Angeleno, but I'd love you to elaborate a little bit more for people who might not be actually familiar with Californian Angeleno food.
I think the answer that most people would think of is Californian being my lineage and association of my professional cooking is the lineage of farm to table cooking, which comes from I think it's a little bit um, even though it's an honest truth, I think there's some aspects of it that we need to revisit because almost everything is from farm to table, and everyone's used those terms so often. So I actually do not like those terms, but there is a lineage of a certain type of cuisine that comes from made more most modern lineage from the Chez Panisse and Thomas Keller, School of Cooking, straight from the farm and talking about it. It's more the narrative. It's always been practically done that way, but I think the narrative has been made popular by Alice Waters and Thomas Keller, and that's what's been drilled into us of a certain generation. But I think looking back and just kind of trying to move and decolonize the way we think a little bit. We've always eaten like this, and I think it is really disrespectful to not acknowledge that food has always been like this, both with indigenous Californians or indigenous lands, the Tongva land that we live on, as well as cultures that have always eaten like this. And to call it that it's exclusive to California is really not fair. However, when I say it's Angelina or Californian food, what I do mean is we look at ingredients first. We always look at what's available near us, what's growing here, and then not only the produce and ingredients and what's grown and what's produced here, but it's about the people. I think LA is such a great intersection of many cultures and many backgrounds, either race, culture, ethnicity. I think across the board, there's just an incredible amount of diversity, and it's a very unique city compared to other cities in the world. I think a lot of cities in major metropolitan areas in the United States can be considered diverse, including New York and San Francisco. But I think LA is a little different because we really, we don't really articulate ourselves very well, but we really love each other's food. We really, go into the San Gabriel Valley. There's little pockets, and we really go there and really enjoy people's food. And then there's like, of course, there's tacos everywhere of all different kinds, and those are the influences that make Los Angeles. So in addition to, the farm to table movement, getting the best produce, I think California, hands down, has the best ingredients in the world. I think people may be upset at that, but I have seen plenty of my friends from Copenhagen who hails the best ingredients in the world come to California and LA specifically and just stare at our farmers market and stare at the produce we get and stare at our farms and say, what, you know what? You guys are right. You do have the best produce in the world. And it is a little it's like we just Angelinos are funny. We don't talk about our even though we're like the entertainment capital of the world, and you think there's so much narcissism. I think with food, we're not as narcissistic as other places. That's why we're so, we're just like, we feed you, we love you. I think even all the Michelin star restaurants in town, I can easily say that they don't have the same sense of narcissism as other places. It's just because I think the culture is a lot more inclusive here, and that's what makes Angelino food really Angelinos. We really strive really hard. Either you be the two Michelin star, Vespertine and Naka Providence. all three of those restaurants are super inclusive for what they are. Um, and they're very Angeleno, and I am so respectful of other restaurants in our community. It's a very special community. Um, and so when I think of Angeleno food, I think it's a lot of community. I think of it as being ingredients, and I think of it as having influences from all over the world, but using the ingredients that's local to us here.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm always very envious of your farmers markets. And yep, but you mentioned ethnic foods, which obviously are so key to LA cuisines. So, Min, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were born and raised in LA, but you do have Vietnamese roots. Is that right?
I do. My mom is an amazing Vietnamese cook. I do not cook Vietnamese food. It's quite offensive. People always want to say I cook Vietnamese food, and or they think I'm Filipino because one of our restaurants in historic Filipino, and I think to call it anything but Angelino is quite offensive. But it's a very hard concept for people to understand. People think that food is related to ethnicity a lot, and I think that is it's not quite right in LA. I think because you go. I think when it is such, there's so much diversity in culture, and and even food. When you think of ethnicity, people think, oh, that's Mexican, that's Vietnamese, but there's so much diasporic Vietnamese, who are Chinese, who are different, and they go to Australia, they go to LA, and they go to San Jose, they go to anywhere, and it changes, right? And then in Vietnam, Vietnamese food in Vietnam itself is not the same as people who left there, in the 60s, 70s, like my parents. And I think and all food has changed. And I think people get really bogged down by the ethnicity of someone and what they cook. Um, I don't believe in appropriation. I don't believe you can take someone's food and then cook it and then make money off of it. I think that's wrong. But I think you have to be more open and not say, or is this authentic? Because what does that mean? And I think the world is very stuck on that. And they allow, it's really funny because they allow, no offense to, white and Caucasians and Europeans, but they allow Europeans to cook anything they want, but they don't allow other people of color to cook foods, that are not them, and then say, hey, what people always ask me, what are you? And I'm like, Angelino, and they will look at me again, and they're like, what are you? I'm like, oh, you need to ask where, what ethnicity I am. I'm Vietnamese. My mom is a great Vietnamese cook. She would be wildly offended if I called this Vietnamese food. And it takes people a moment, and they're like, well, what kind of food is this? I can't call it Japanese food. I can't call it Mexican food. I can't apply an ethnicity to it. But what I can say, it's grown in California. I grew up here. It is a love letter to California. It's a love letter to LA. It's showing what LA can do. And I think that's something we have to start talking about, thinking about a lot. I mean, it's been talked about for the last decade, but people still have such a hard time.
In Phenakite, I understand you serve a 10-course tasting menu. Is that right?
We go a little bit further than 10 course. We start with 10 course as our base.
Can you give us a taste of what's on offer there?
We do, I think first and foremost for us, ingredients is really important. Ingredients, and then also there's always narratives of why each course is on the menu. I think I can talk about two signature courses. Of course, like we really love our intermezzos and our cleanse and things are in between. Those courses are equally important, if not more important than some of the main courses, because it shows you, it tells a story, and it connects your palate, and it resets your palate. So I think those are really important. But we go through the first few courses are more experimental, and then we go into courses that are a little bit more familiar, because I truly believe when you are at a tasting menu, you should leave very satisfied. You should be left curious, cerebrally. You should be left with a lot of love and care, knowing that there's been a lot of love and care, and a lot of dialogue rather than like one-way performance. I think that's really important in our food. And then finally, I really want people to be satiated emotionally and physically, and that's something that's very For us, it's something that we practice. It is a little bit of it's not all fine dining is that way, but for us, it's really important to people to leave. Because sometimes, like, I go to a fine dining restaurant that's amazing, and I'm like, my mind is blown, and I'm very full. I feel very full, but emotionally, I felt very. It was still so cold, and so it's a chef's way of thinking, and it's so it's usually like I connect to it on a cerebral level, but I don't connect to it in my gut. It doesn't feel warm and lovely. I go home and I have to eat a bowl of rice because I'm Vietnamese. You know, and some people they go to fine dining, they go home, they have to eat a hamburger or they have to go get, a second meal. It happens to a lot of people, to be honest with you. I hear about it all the time because even though you're so, cerebrally fulfilled and you are left wondering and you may have had this performance, but you just felt like you went through a performance and now you have to eat after the performance. And for me, I feel like food should nourish you from the inside out. So there are courses that we put on there that I know is just a big hug and a big like I care for you. It's not I know this is good. I'm confident of my food. I don't need to show off. It's about you. And I think that's very it is a little bit different in fine dining. It's about caring for people. And not that fine dining doesn't care for people, but it is a little bit about show, which we have too. But I also think it's about thoughtfulness and caring for the guests in a very special way. So, one of our courses, probably one of my favorite, is called Gratitude, um, because it's the one that it's the end towards the last savory course. And it is a porridge course, and we're really thankful. It reminds us to be very grateful and thankful. It makes whoever's serving that dish, our team, stop and think about and really be really thankful to the guests first and foremost, and then thankful for our community because that dish uh, was made in collaboration with Anaka with Nikki and Carol during the pandemic when we did a collaboration with them. And then it's also being thankful for our purveyor, our rice purveyor, who provides rice, locally grown rice that is provided to us, an heirloom variety that's provided to us across all of our brands. But it's Robin Coda of Coda Farms. So it also reminds us, that ingredients are super important and the people who grow them are important. And then we are also thankful because it is such a humble dish that pretty much built our businesses. It's we are at the heart and soul. Our business you know that keeps that everyone knows about is porridge and puffs. So it's an homage to porridge. And it also is a reminder that we come from humble roots and everyone can have this food and everyone should have this food, that no matter how big of a performance or how big you think these ideas are, at the end of the day, it's about giving people comfort, love, and care through food. So it's a very important course for me. Um, and it's delicious and it's a very quiet dish. It's a very zen dish. It's very us, but it has so many techniques and so many ingredients and so much love and care in it that you just eat it and you don't have to think about all these things that we put in there because it's really about the guest and the diner and how much we care for you. And I think that is something we practice a lot in the restaurant. That's very different than other fine dining restaurants because it's yes, I think of these things and yes, I know I'm creative and I'm confident of what I do, but I do it because I really love people and I really want to give them my best. And it's like at this point in my life, it's yes, can I show off and do things that are great on Instagram? Of course. But does that matter to me? No, it doesn't matter because, I'm like, who cares? That's so temporary. For me, it's something much deeper and more profound to leave people feeling good about themselves and meeting them where they are.
That's really wonderful. You mentioned Nikki Nakayama and Naka, her restaurant. I want to ask you a little bit more about that collaboration. And for those who are not familiar, Nikki Nakayama is an LA-based chef. Pre-pandemic, in 2019, I think, her restaurant and Naka received 2 Michelin stars. So have you collaborated on just some dishes from the tasting menu?
I think it's more she inspired me to be brave about taking a step in business. And I think that's really important. I think I do, not narcissistic, but I think I'm one of probably, confidently creative in the industry. I always have been. That is my strength. But however, my strength has not always been, and I'm very bold, but my strength has always not always been in business. I'm very, because you care for people so much and it's a transaction with money, it's still very unnerving for me. I don't put money value to my work because that's very hard for me to do, but we do live in a capitalistic society. So that's something that I think is very hard for me to wrap my head around still. And I think what Nikki and Carol does is they're like, you deserve more attention so you can do this more. And I think that's the inspiration is they gave me permission to think about charging properly so I can take care of people and looking at the business a little bit more wisely. Something that you don't think about when you think about a fine dining restaurant. And I think it's really important. And so obviously they are incredibly creative. They're incredibly smart and they're incredibly resourceful. And those are things I think being resourceful is something that is a dying art. And there's a whole nother layer to a restaurant that people don't think about is training the next generation that I do a lot. But you have to give them true. It's not about things you see in Netflix, and that's easy. That's the stuff that they can shoot, and really, it's about the real work that happens at practice every day. Either it be the culinary work, but there's also, if you continue this art, unfortunately, in this world, in at least in the Western world that we live in Eastern world too, but it is very capitalistic. There's nothing you can't, you want to give this stuff away for free, but people, it doesn't work like that. It is a transactional exchange, which is really hard because you're giving something so emotionally, and you have to put a value on it, a capitalistic value on it, which is incredibly difficult for me. And I think to talk about Nikki and Carol, they give me a lot of inspiration for that. But what they was something that was a point of tension that we talked about is I was very anti-Michelin. Um, I've always been anti-Michelin. I think it's very European based. They favor European restaurants, and then they started favoring Japanese restaurant, especially in countries that are outside of Asia. And they don't, because they're Europeans and they are such colonizers, specifically French, and they're such colonizers that they wouldn't give a Vietnamese restaurant, a Michelin star restaurant outside of Vietnam, just because they see it as not the same kind of food and not the same kind of level. So it's completely offensive to me. And the amount of restaurants that they award to men versus women, I think I don't call myself a female chef. I'm like, I stand up there right with any chef, period. However, they are very, what they're attracted to is very masculine and an old way of thinking that I don't like. I want that to change. And then I think what Carol and Nikki, Carol's Nikki's partner, both in the restaurant and in life. I think both chefs, Carol and Nikki, what they've said is they're like, if you don't they were kidding. They said, and kind of kidding. They said, if you don't participate in that, we have to keep going to these parties alone, and we hate it. And we really need some friends to show up and be with us. And they said, and if there's anyone we want to hang out with, it would be you. But what they're saying is, come on, you know what? We don't like it either, but it's reality. And if we don't, and I am told a lot, if you don't take it, some other white man's going to take it. And it happens a lot in my career because I'm very principled. And I said, you're going to give me that award. I don't like what you stand for. I'm going to give you that award back. And I'm very honest. And I turn things down, or I just look at people and I'm like, I don't really share the same value with you. You can give me that award, but I don't value what you stand for. But that kind of rebellious thinking works for me, but it hurts the team that I train because it makes them always, against the grain. And then it leaves us out of the conversation. So I think with Phenakite, I concentrate more on my art And then everything else, I'm like, well, if it happens, it is a good thing. If you get a Michelin, it's a good thing because I'm doing all those things anyways. I'm buying, getting the best ingredients I can. I'm giving people the best I can. We're doing the best, why wouldn't we? If we're doing it anyways. And so why wouldn't we want to be recognized? And I also think something that I have succumbed to with the Michelin is I think if it comes to LA and if we are awarded it, I think it would just be good for my team members. It would be good for them so their careers, their young careers can blossom. And those are the things that I think about a little bit, that I don't do it just for myself. When I'm in my 20s, I do things for myself. I'm like, I don't give a, I don't care. I'm confident. I can create. I don't have to be in that system. But now that I have a team that I really, I'm older, I have a team that I really care for, that I want to pass these ideas on to them. I think them having a little bit of universal currency helps them with their career, especially after what happened in the last 18 months.
Yeah, definitely. So, in terms of your team, which you just mentioned, I've heard you say that you actually describe them as the greatest strength you have. You've been very outspoken in terms of creating more sustainable working environment, and it's really kind of refreshing in terms of all the toxic news that comes out from the kitchens of the fine dining restaurants. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Maybe perhaps.
So I think I think every single kitchen is different. I For me, I'm very demanding. So I think people think they come to our kitchen and it's like not as demanding. And I'm like, actually, we're kind of more demanding. But I also think you can say it in a way that can inspire people differently. That's more kind and see them on their level. And sometimes people come in and they're not feeling themselves, and you give them a little bit of a break. I just think it's just across the board. It's just being more thoughtful and seeing people as humans. And our culture of our place is different. It's much more sensitive and caring, but it doesn't mean it's any less demanding. It may be more demanding because, seeing disappointment in someone who cares about you may be worse, as my team tells me. Just hit me, just hit me. I'd rather you just hit me and yell at me right now rather than the look of disappointment in your eyes. So I think it is a different way of working. And it's a culture that I think it's changing right now. The whole restaurant industry is changing a lot right now, and um, we as restaurant people have to remember that the people around us, it's a collaborative effort, and the people around us is what makes it. It is at my best asset is always every single restaurant's best asset is their team. Every single one. If any chef doesn't believe that, then they can go cook by themselves and it's a different thing. It's not a restaurant. It's not a restaurant. And they have to be honest about that. They can be a stand in a one-person restaurant, but I think to be a chef, and I think this is things that I think people are gonna disagree with me, but I'm like, if you're gonna call yourself anyone, the name can mean anything. It can be a home cook who's really good, can be a chef. But for me, I don't think that's true. I think in order to be a chef, you have to be a leader. You have to have a team. You have to run a kitchen. You have to do this every day. And that's what makes you a chef. If you're just a chef on TV, that's not really the same kind of chef that I am. I wake up and I deal with this every day. And I think there has to be a different name for us. It can't just be, someone who plays a chef and someone who is creative. Being creative alone is not being a chef. That's just, that's ego. It's like you have to execute it and you have to pass it on and train it and run a kitchen and be the plumber, be the electrician. People are getting sick, making those decisions every day. That's a chef. And I don't think it's fair of anyone else who doesn't do that calling themselves a chef.
Huge mission. So, Min, I'd love to finish off with one last question and asking you about your favorite culinary experiences in LA that a visitor shouldn't miss.
Obviously, you should visit you should always I think the Michelin star restaurants and some restaurants are going to be hard to get into, but I think that's okay. I think there's so much good food in LA that you can always come back and visit. LA, the whole city is a destination dining. You can get a taco, just like in Mexico City, a little different, a little different. You can get something off, a street stand. and be equally excited and enjoyable and fascinated as you would in a fine dining restaurant. So it's very, I don't think economics really, in LA matters as much. LA is very, very good with casual um, dining. I think there's a lot of good options. I think, obviously there's inside Grand Central alone, there's so much good dining options. Shiku, my one of my favorite people in the world, some of my favorite people in the world who used to own Baru. They do amazing work. There's Perilla, there's amazing Korean food here. There's amazing Vietnamese food. Even though, like, if you talk about ethnicity, I think everyone interprets it different, but there's amazing food that's very Angeleno all over. I think there's burgers that have influences from tacos, and tacos that have influences from Korean barbecue, and Korean, and pho that has, Korean barbecue that has influences from pho with the same spices. I think we cross meld a lot. It's very hard to go wrong with any meal in LA. You should always find a place you can sit on the sun because the LA sun is beautiful. But yeah, I think to call out any more restaurants, it's really difficult because there's so many good restaurants here, and you just have to walk on this, in neighborhoods. There are a lot of little neighborhoods in LA that people don't think of. There's, like, the West Side, which I would say if you're gonna eat on the East Side first if you're really into food. The West Side is mostly is there's great food there, but it's a little different. It's not as different. It's not as varied. I think the more varied food, the further east you go, the more the food's varied and has a little bit more flavor. It's just a little bit more risk taking.
That's amazing. Great insights from the master chef. Min, thank you so very much. It's been a great pleasure. I know that the impact of COVID in the past year has been particularly hard on the food industry. So I wish you and your team lots of resilience. Keep on in there. Keep on being creative. And I can't wait to be in LA next and get to try some of your creations. Thanks so much, Min. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Take care. Thanks for having me. Bye, Aga.